Hi, class, and we are welcoming this week chapter 5. So we're just moving right along in our discussion about job evaluation and things related. So, again, chapter 5 is about job based structures and job evaluation itself because, job evaluation determines the value of the jobs, as you can imagine. So, we have to kind of know where each job in the organization ranks, if you will, to determine salary, to determine if there's a bonus structure, to determine kind of everything related to promotions and transfers and anything related to that. So, job evaluation is kind of that first step as we kind of look at our internally aligned pay structure that we've talked about the last couple of chapters. And again, job evaluation supports the idea of an internally aligned pay structure because, again, when we are internally aligned, we support the organization most importantly, but we also the flow of work happens better. It fits that flow better. There's a fairness to employees. So all internal employees feel like there's a fairness to it. And it also helps to motivate employees to do their best work when they feel like their jobs are evaluated fairly consistently and equitably. And that's essentially what we want. To kind of start this off, we have to sample these jobs, or at least kind of a good start part is what we call benchmarking, or just a fancy way of saying sampling, our jobs. Exhibit 5.4 in your textbook does a really good job of kind of figuring out how do we place jobs kind of in certain benchmark groups, essentially. One group could be anybody who's in management is in one group. Anybody who's an administrative assistant role is in one group. Anybody who's in engineering is in one group. Marketing's in one group. We try to sample as many jobs that kind of find some similarities, and then we group them together to be able to benchmark them essentially. And then once we've done that, we're kind of ready to determine how are we going to evaluate our jobs. And there's 3 methods that we're going to talk about that are really going to be key throughout the rest of the semester. To give you an idea of the relative importance of the job evaluation methods, if you've already looked ahead to checkpoint number 1, a lot of what you're going to be doing in checkpoint number 1 is related to the job evaluation methods that we're about to discuss. And then again, it'll be a consistent theme, these types of rankings and classifications and methods, so to speak, throughout the rest of the semester. So make sure you pay very careful attention to these next 3 job evaluation methods. And actually, if you go to Exhibit 5.5 in the textbook, it's a good summary of what I'll call the pros and the cons of job evaluation methods. Again, we're going to talk about what they are here in a second, but not only are these methods important for your checkpoint, but I'm cheating a little bit. I'll go ahead and give you a little hint. I take a lot of test questions from this idea about the pros and cons of certain methods. I like to make sure that these are really, really well known. So again, just know this is also a topic that I cover on the exam pretty frequently. So we'll start with the first one, which is called ranking. And it's probably the easiest because, again, you just order jobs from highest to lowest based on their value. I mean, it's simple, it's easy, it's direct, it's kind of the easiest one to understand because whatever you consider the highest job in your organization based on the value of that job, that's the highest rank, then you just go all the way down to the last job. And obviously, as you can imagine, usually the highest ranked jobs are usually the executives. So there's a reason why companies don't have 7 or 8 chief executive officers. There's usually one CEO, and in most organizations, that top person has the highest ranking, again, which generally means they have the highest net worth. They usually make the most money. They have the broadest job description because they have to be involved in so many aspects of the organization. And then you go down, and all the way to the bottom, and the bottom could be somebody, real simple, somebody who, is just a part-time clerk in a store, for example. So again, all jobs are important for obvious reasons, but we don't have, if you're running a store, for example, you need more than one clerk. You might just have one store manager, but you might have 50 clerks, for example. So there's that ranking of the relative, value of the jobs from highest to lowest. That's the ranking method. Excuse me. The second method is what we call the classification method. And this is basically kind of a series of classes that cover the range of jobs. Again, that's why it's called classification, because it's made up of classes. So essentially what we do is we take our job description. We've talked about how we create our job description, and we compare those to the class to decide which classes, or I'm sorry, we compare those to the class descriptions that we have, and we decide which class is the best fit for that job. So again, we're trying to figure out where the job goes in relative order. I'll give you a great example. If you've ever worked in any type of compliance role or know anybody who's worked in compliance, compliance is a very broad, structured thing. And to give you an idea, I've worked in organizations where compliance is part of the legal department. I've worked where compliance is part of the finance department. I've worked where compliance is part of executive management. I've even seen in organizations where compliance is completely outsourced so that there's no internal structures. Through the classification method, you're going to take, the job descriptions that are in compliance and determine which class do they belong to. Do they belong to finance? Do they belong to, legal? So that's kind of then, that helps determine then the value of the jobs from there. So that's the classification method. So the third and final one is what we call the point method. And the point method is most common here in the U.S. Again, ranking and classification are used in the U.S. I don't want to indicate that they're not, but the most common method that is used in the U.S. is what we call the point method. And the point method is unique because it uses what we call compensable factors. Again, a term that I definitely want you to know. Compensable factors is a fancy way of saying how do we determine how does work contribute to strategy and objectives. So whenever we have these different factors, each one related to a job, what do those factors contribute to strategy and objectives? Going back to the example I just used, if you're a clerk, your job is to ring customers in and out. While it's important to get the money and to move the merchandise, that role is not as related to the overall company strategy and objectives. Where if you're, the chief executive, everything the CEO does, every decision they make, everything that they work on relates to the strategy and the objectives of the organization. So it's a little bit more broad focus. Generally, the more specific and detailed the jobs get, the relative less value to the organization because they're easier to replace. A part-time clerk is easier to replace than the CEO of a company, for example. So, but again, the point method uses these compensable factors to help to contribute to strategy and objectives. And then once we have these points, if you will, they're assigned to a weight, if you will. It's called a factor weight. And the total points determines the job structure. So it's kind of like we add up all these different points, all these numbers, these different values that we have. And then once, the highest ones that are scored have, are determines the job structure and where they are in the organization itself. So it's kind of a number system, if you will. So again, most organizations, especially the ones I've worked in, usually use the point method. Now, on your actual the project, you're going to be asked to kind of look at the threes and determine what is the best way to evaluate the jobs that you're going to be evaluating. And again, all three have their pros and all three have their cons. That's Exhibit 5.5 that I want to make sure that you know. So, but most importantly, just know that all three of these are valid methods and they will be very important for you to know as we go along. So make sure, in addition to listening to this video, make sure you read the textbook very closely on these and look at the PowerPoint that I provide as well, because again, it is vitally important to understand the ideas behind ranking, classification, and the point method. So, as always, if you have any specific questions about any of the three of them, don't hesitate to let me know. But that's kind of the main topics that I want to cover for Chapter 5. Again, the book does cover a few other topics here and there. While it's important, I do want you to read it. What I've gone over so far are really the key points that I want you to know. So, thank you as always, everyone. Keep up the good work, and next time we meet, we'll be on to Chapter 6. Thanks, everyone.